Welcome back to more FPL content. This will be the best wildcard team for Game Week 23. We have a double game week on the horizon, and we've got some plum fixtures for some of these double game week teams, of course, like Liverpool, who just got a 2-1 victory over Lille. This video is recorded on Wednesday, so there could be some updates after the Champions League games, and if needed, I will show you an updated wildcard team during the deadline stream in a couple of days' time, or in a separate video. Smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. If you enjoy my content, I promise to get this to over 200 likes and to keep on pushing towards new goals like 32,000 subscribers. Check all the links in the description below for my Patreon and the championships for early access to my videos, amongst many other perks. The Discord server, FPL League Draft Town, Spotify and Blue Sky can all be found in the description. And thank you to the super chatters, patrons, channel members, and those that have gifted memberships in the recent live streams. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. In terms of squad value, I have 104.5 million overall, but with spending power, it's 102.2 million. It will vary for everybody watching, and I'll discuss alternatives as we go along in each position, as I usually do. If you aren't aware, the wildcard allows you to make unlimited changes to your squad, and it is a long-term tool where it's not just specifically designed for one game week, it's for multiple game weeks on top of that, and it can really be the start of a comeback in some cases, or cementing your position in a very decent rank. But let's start off with the two goalkeepers, and at the moment, I think there's one standout with a double game week in 24. I'm still fairly keen on the likes of Sales. Even David Raya could be a long-term hold, but I think Jordan Pickford is the best goalkeeper to invest in right now. They conceded 2 goals to Tottenham Hotspur, but they were 3-0 up in David Moyes' second game in charge upon his return, and they lost to Aston Villa 1-0 in his debut, but I think Jordan Pickford is going to be a decent shot stopper who can make penalty saves. He's already done it on 2 occasions this season, denying Anthony Gordon and Erling Haaland, and he's also got that plum fixture against Leicester City at home in Game Week 24. But for those that aren't wildcarding, I wouldn't recommend buying Jordan Pickford this week against Brighton away. I'm not that confident of a clean sheet, and it looks like the Seagulls have turned the corner with some very positive results. They've got 3 consecutive victories, and they're unbeaten in quite a while now. But Jordan Pickford is still a good long-term investment. If you are buying a goalkeeper with an eye for Game Week 24 and beyond, I think Pickford is the best option. Matt Sells is still very decent, but Nottingham Forest's fixtures are quite mixed bag, and with that double, I think Pickford just about shades it. There's also blank Game Week 29 to take into account, and both Pickford and Sells are projected to feature in that blank game week. As for the backup though, I'm going to stick with Fabianski. I don't think you need to spend too much money in this position. I think in isolation, Dubravka is an even better option, but there's always that kind of doubt about Nick Pope returning from injury. And with Newcastle, they're likely going to blank in Game Week 29. And I think 1 or 2 Newcastle players is the sweet spot right now. I wouldn't advocate a triple up at this moment in time. When we look ahead to double Game Week 24, the second best doubler that week will be Trent Alexander-Arnold. He might not be the best value in terms of defenders in the game, but with the Ipswich Town fixture in Game Week 23, a rest against Lille in the Champions League, and then that double against Bournemouth and Everton away, I think Trent's got a very high ceiling, and despite how good Bournemouth have been, Trent got a massive return against them in the reverse fixture. I don't think that'll be the case this time round, but just 1 assist, that's all he needs for a very decent return, because he can mix that up with bonus points as well. And I think Trent is one of the best defenders in the game, and it's all a question of, do you have the budget to facilitate him into your squad? I'll be discussing him in detail in my team selection podcast, but the way I'd rank Liverpool assets is Salah first, Trent second, and one of Van Dijk or Gakpo in third. You might even want to use the assistant manager chip on Arne Slot, and if that's the case, I'll discuss 1 or 2 alternatives where you can go different in certain positions, and that way you can facilitate Salah as your captain, Arne Slot, and have a very decent Game Week 24 to say the least. And he's not the only double Game Week manager you can use the AM chip on. You could also consider David Moyes, who is considerably cheaper. But let's go to other defenders who are also going to be much cheaper than Trent Alexander-Arnold, and one of them is going to be Daniel Munoz, but there is a likelihood that Crystal Palace will blank in Game Week 29. You need to factor this in when you are wildcarding, and even though this team will be optimized for double Game Week 24 and the preceding game weeks, there are future doubles and blanks to take into account in 29, 33, and 34. So it's going to be difficult to navigate all of them. And if you do wildcard now, I'd highly suggest rolling as many transfers as you can when we approach the future doubles and blanks. But Daniel Munoz is a good option in isolation. Crystal Palace have kept back-to-back clean sheets, and Munoz has always got the attacking potential, which makes him an enticing option, even at that price point. And he's got relatively low ownership in the grand scheme of things. You might consider Dean Henderson in goal. I think that's a fair shout between the sticks, and he's right up there in the top 5 goalkeepers in the game. The likes of Mark Gay are decent FPL defenders, but Daniel Munoz is worth the extra millions, in my opinion. Let's now go to another defender who has had some tough fixtures recently, but has gotten through them big time. I think Milos Kerkez is a very good investment in the long term, but the next 2 fixtures are Nottingham Forest and Liverpool, but then it's Southampton and Wolves, and Bournemouth have been on fire recently. That 4-1 victory against Newcastle was mightily impressive to say the least, and they're unbeaten in 11 Premier League matches, and I wouldn't mind 2 or 3 Bournemouth players. I think 2 is the sweet spot. You go for Kerkez in this defensive line, and then 1 midfielder. I'm not too keen on Kepa Arrizabalaga personally, and the likes of Howson or Kerkez will be the best ways to cover the cherries defensively. But let's complete this defensive line with even more enticing options, so to speak, but they are very cheap, and one of them is actually a very decent 4.4 million defender who could feature in Gameweek 29 against Ipswich Town, and that's going to be Nico Williams. If you are looking to invest in Forest defensively at this moment in time, I think Williams might be the ideal pick because he can essentially act as your 4th or 5th defender and rotate from time to time, but it would be slightly different if you had the likes of Sells in goal, Aina, Milenkovic, and the other Forest defenders, which include Murillo. With Nico Williams' cheaper price tag, you could rotate him more efficiently because the upcoming fixtures aren't great on paper. Bournemouth, Brighton and Fulham. I think Forest could concede in all of those games, but they have surprised us on multiple occasions this season, keeping a clean sheet at Anfield, something that no other team will do in this campaign. And I think Nico Williams at this price offers great value. He has started so many games consecutively now. That's 7 in the Premier League, and he could make it 8 in Gameweek 23. But let's go for another 4.4 million defender to complete this defensive line. And I think Mykolenko is a decent option for double Gameweek 24, but you don't need to go for a double or triple up in Everton simply because they have a double. The only fixture that really appeals to me is Leicester City at home, who have been toothless in recent matches. And I think Pickford is more than enough. He's by far the best Everton asset, period. Mykolenko would be right up there because of value, but ultimately, you don't need to force this defensive double up for Everton. Let's get the obvious out of the way. Mohamed Salah will undoubtedly make this wildcard team. He's the best double Gameweek 24 option, and he also faces Ipswich Town next, who shipped in 6 goals against Manchester City, and Salah performed very well in midweek against Lille, scoring a terrific goal and winning player of the match in UCL Fantasy. So I think Mohamed Salah is a terrific option. He's been outstanding all season. Despite some recent blips, I think you can forgive him for that due to the sheer consistency, the double-digit hauls, the output. It's been all outrageous. No other player across Europe's top 5 leagues has come close to him in terms of goals and assists so far this season. That might change in the second half of the campaign, but up until now, I think Salah is the best FPL option, and he's still the best midfielder, of course. But very close to him is Cole Palmer, who wasn't injured out for Gameweek 22, and he disappointed on Monday night against Wolves, but I think he's the only one who can get close to Salah at this moment in time. I know there are other good midfielders that I'll talk about very soon, but Palmer is the one that has that double-digit haul output. He's a great captaincy option in most weeks, but he does face Man City away next, and Chelsea's fixtures turn for the worse fairly soon. But Palmer is likely going to feature in Gameweek 29 against Arsenal, and he's one of the best options in the game. So despite the poor fixture on paper, you'd still expect Palmer to get some attacking returns. Let's now move on though to great value options like Brian Mbeumo, who is going to be very, very popular over the next couple of weeks. The same goes for Visser up front. He'll be more of a differential to be fair, but if you can go for that sort of Brentford attacking double up, I wouldn't mind that at all. And Mbeumo is my preference if I had to pick one of them. He is a great midfielder with good underlying stats. He's on penalties, and Brentford have terrific fixtures now for the foreseeable future. And even when Brentford had a tough run, Mbeumo was still getting some decent returns, and he capped it off with a 19-pointer against Southampton when he finally had a good fixture amidst all of the reds and purples on the FDR. I think Mbeumo is a fantastic option, and I'd highly recommend him if you haven't got him already. Would I sell Gordon to Mbeumo this week? Definitely not, but that's something you could consider around Gameweek 25 or 26, maybe even sooner for double Gameweek 24. But as I mentioned earlier, the priority will be tripling up on Liverpool and making those transfers instead. Despite having some poor long-term fixtures though, I'd still recommend Anthony Gordon, or at least him being involved in the pool of players you should consider in this midfield. It's Southampton away this week, then Fulham at home, then it gets relatively tough against the likes of Nottingham Forest and Manchester City, but I think Gordon can still perform well in some of these games, and he has been outstanding recently. His first blank in quite a while actually. Came against Bournemouth in the early kickoff on Saturday, but before that he had 9 goals and assists combined in 9 matches, and he didn't blank in that time frame. Newcastle were so close to winning 10 consecutive matches across all competitions for the first time in their history. But the final option, despite him being a skip in the Transits video the other day, I'd still recommend one of Semenyo or Kluivert, who does make it into this setup. But as I mentioned in that video, I would only skip buying him this week. You don't need to rush into him when he faces Nottingham Forest and Liverpool. I think the best time to buy Bournemouth assets would be Gameweek 25, and the likes of Kerkez and Kluivert could be on your bench in the meantime. If you aren't planning to use the assistant manager chip on Arne's slot, I'd highly recommend a Liverpool triple up of Salah, Trent Alexander-Arnold, and one of Gakpo or Virgil van Dijk. Even Konate's decent to be fair, and Diaz could be a nice punt in the midfield, and it ultimately depends on your team situation. Do you need to replace a certain midfielder, defender or forward? And I think the ideal Liverpool triple up will come from that sort of scenario, but Gakpo would be my slight preference. I think Van Dijk comes closest to him, and Arne's slot is ideally the best triple up in Liverpool, but not everyone is going to use the assistant manager chip in Gameweek 24, and even if they do, there's no guarantee they have enough money in the bank to go for Arne's slot, because remember, that manager will actually take part of your triple up in a certain team, and he also costs a certain amount. So in the case of Arne's slot, it's 1.5 million on top of your 15-man squad. So you would need to build this wildcard team and still have 1.5 million left over. And if you wanted to go in that direction, the alternative to Gakpo would be Jean-Philippe Mateta, who has been in excellent form recently, and I highlighted him as a purchase a couple of weeks ago in an updated Transits video, and once again in the recent one, because I still think the fixtures are there for him to do very well. 4 home games out of the next 6, but Crystal Palace have been even better on their travels, which I highlighted as well in my recent podcast. But Gakpo is a nice option to buy this week. He was rested in the Champions League against Lille. He was on the bench, and now he's going to face Ipswich Town, and he's got a double game week with a huge gap in between, and I think Gakpo could actually be rested in the Cups and start the Premier League matches. If that's the case, he makes a very enticing option for double game week 24. And a few weeks afterwards, you could look to sell the likes of Matheus Cunha, especially if you want to navigate blank game week 29 without the use of the free hit. Next up, though, is Chris Wood, who is second only behind Isak in terms of points scored amongst forwards. He has been outstanding this season. No one expected it. And despite Forest being linked to multiple strikers like Vissa and also Matheus Cunha, I still think Chris Wood will be the number 1 choice up front. But let's see what Nottingham Forest can do in this transfer window. And I do think Forest are worth doubling up on even now. Maybe 1 is a sweet spot with the fixtures in mind and other scenarios, but I don't mind Nico Williams as a rotational option in that defensive line. And then Chris Wood up front is fixture proof, and I think is a long-term hold until the end of the season potentially, unless his form seriously dips. But last and certainly not least is Alexander Isak, the top dog in FPL amongst forwards. And despite that blank against Bournemouth and a bit of disappointment about not breaking Jamie Vardy's record of scoring in 11 consecutive games, he came relatively close with 8 matches. And I always said if he can go through that Bournemouth game and score a goal, he had a great chance to break the record, because he had Southampton away next, and I still back him to do very well in that fixture. But maybe Southampton will be a tougher game than Ipswich Town will be for Liverpool when you compare Isak and Salah for the captaincy. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below in regards to the armband and other factors like the best triple up in Liverpool, and which Everton assets are you considering for double game week 24, and what about the AM chip, the assistant manager, David Moyes or Arne slot in game week 24, or do we save it for later in the season? The starting 11 of this wildcard team will be Jordan Pickford in goal, facing Brighton away. It's not an ideal fixture, and if you've got David Raya, for example, I would not be selling him to Pickford in game week 23, but that could be a decent move when Arsenal host Man City in double game week 24, and Pickford will face Leicester and Liverpool at home. The back three is Trent, Munoz and Kerkez, with a midfield 4 of Salah, Mbeumo, Gordon and Palmer, then Chris Wood, Gakpo and Isak up front, and the bench comprises of Fabianski, Kluivert, Nico Williams and Mikalenko. I'm not particularly fond of benching Kluivert or Semenyo in certain cases, but you have to bench one of these midfielders or forwards, and I just don't see that being the case. Both Chris Wood and Semenyo scored in the reverse fixture back in game week 1 between Bournemouth and Nottingham Forest, and they could do the same thing once again. And with Kluivert, he does heavily rely on penalties, at least before Game Week 22, but that hat-trick against Newcastle was mightily impressive, and there are a few things you can do here and there. I've got nothing left over in the bank personally, and some of you might have even more money to spend and make a few upgrades, and others will have not enough to build this exact 15-man squad. But in the case of Kirkes, for example, you could go for Lewis Hall now and target that Southampton away fixture if you've got extra funds. He has gone up to 5.1 million very recently, and then you can move off that Newcastle double or triple up. And the same goes for Anthony Gordon. If you are wildcarding, whilst it's not ideal, you might consider another midfielder like Bruno Fernandes, Amad Diallo, Morgan Rogers, and all the others I've discussed in my recent podcasts, and go off Anthony Gordon, because long term he might not be the best solution, especially with Newcastle likely blanking in Game Week 29. But we can't think too much about one Game Week in particular. The same goes for Double Game Week 24 even, but this wildcard team will set you up for the long term and build a very solid platform. If you've got multiple free transfers, you can still navigate Double Game Week 24 in a very efficient way with 5 to 6 doublers potentially, maybe 4, which might be just about enough. And you've got a solid platform for Game Week 23, 25, 26, and not to mention all the future doubles and blanks later this season. Other options I consider in the forward line, for example, is undoubtedly Jean-Philippe Mateta, and that will be your Gakpo replacement, especially if you are using the AM chip on Arne's slot. And other than that, there are a few other options in a few weeks like Matheus Cunha to consider, although he's heavily linked with a move away from Wolves now, and reports indicate he could leave the club in the next couple of days. But a lot will depend on the remainder of this January transfer window, and also how certain teams navigate their upcoming fixture runs. And the likes of Man City, Phil Foden in the midfield could be a great option, but they've got some horrible fixtures coming up, and you would expect a regression in terms of his output. He has 48 points in the last 4 game weeks. It might be a case of holding Foden if you have him, but on the wild card, probably going elsewhere and looking for the next sort of Phil Foden, so to speak, with that high ceiling and plum fixtures. In terms of the captaincy, I have a slight preference for Salah. I think Ipswich Town shipping in 6 has kind of cemented it for me, and Salah is averaging almost 11 points per game. I think it's now 10.6, whilst Isak has been in phenomenal form, but facing Southampton away, it's a great fixture to be fair, and I could see Newcastle scoring multiple goals, but I also see Liverpool going very strong against Ipswich Town and scoring 4 to 5, and Salah being heavily involved in every single one of them. But it's literally a coin toss. I'm not looking at anybody else for the captaincy this week. Even Trent could be a nice differential. The same goes for Double Gameweek 24, but I think this week it's going to be a straight shootout between Salah and Isak, and at the moment I'm going for the Egyptian, as I have done since Game Week 10. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Our aim is to get this to the 200 likes and to keep on pushing towards new goals like 32,000 subscribers. Follow me on X and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below for my Patreon and the championships for early access to my videos, amongst my other perks. The Discord server, FPL League, Draft Town, Spotify, and Blue Sky can all be found in the description. I appreciate all your support throughout the last couple of weeks. I'll see you very soon for more FPL and UC Fantasy content, as we've got more Champions League action next week.